This is a very special cactus to me. I grew this cactus from a seed I sowed in 2015. Today it is time to transplant it, as I have done multiple times before. I'm going to take you along in my process to show you exactly how I transplant a cactus or any houseplant, focusing on 5 important steps where it is easy to go wrong. My name is Molly, and I'm a horticulturist by passion and profession. I have transplanted thousands of plants in my day. I love sharing my passion for plants, and part of that is ensuring that everyone has access to the knowledge required to make their plants thrive. I will show you my process for this cactus and also include some examples from my work at Grow Nursery, where I get to transplant a wide range of species. First, an overview of what we will cover. 1. Soil mix. 2. Pot size. 3. Root condition. 4. Planting depth. And 5. Watering in. Number 1. Media mix. The first thing I will do is to make sure I have the correct media mixture, which is the thing the plants will grow in, for the plant I'm working with. Some plants prefer media that holds more moisture, such as most carnivorous plants, while others prefer media that is well drained, such as this cactus. For this cactus, I'm mixing a nursery mixture that is mostly peat with a bit of perlite in with pumice. I do about 50-50 peat pumice. The peat will hold water and the pumice will provide the drainage that this cactus craves. Pumice is also a bit heavy, unlike perlite, so it will help to hold the pot up and it won't float to the surface like perlite does. A moist but not wet mixture is easier to work with than a dry one. I will try my best to choose the right media mixture for the plant I'm working with. While most plants prefer a well-drained media, such as the one I have made here, plants vary in their needs. Check trustworthy horticultural resources for more information on your specific type of plant. Number 2. Pot size. The second step to transplanting is picking a pot. You may think that by choosing a larger pot, you're saving time, because you won't have to transplant the plant again anytime soon, and it probably wants more space to grow anyway, right? This is not exactly ideal. Choosing a pot that is an appropriate size for the plant is important because when a plant is in a pot that is too large for it, the pot tends to stay wet too long. Wetness like this can increase the prevalence of disease and also inhibit the flow of air to the roots, basically suffocating them. This wetness tends to linger because small plants in large pots only have a small root mass, so they can't take up all the water in the pot fast enough. If you do size up, just be very conscious of watering. It will be much less frequent than a larger plant for that pot size. For this cactus, I chose the smallest of these 3 pots, although the middle one would have been fine as well. Especially for desert plants, it is important to ensure drainage. Make sure the pot you choose also has a drainage hole. The soil refresh and added pot space, even if small, will be plenty to encourage this plant to keep growing. Number 3. Root disturbance. The next step is to remove the plant from its pot and check out the root ball. If a plant is root bound with roots circling around the base, holding the shape of the pot, I will rough these up a bit. Not a ton, but a bit. Some people get scared to do this because they're afraid that it will damage the plant. It is true that this process can vary a bit by plants, as some are sensitive to root disturbance. But generally, if a plant is root bound, it is important to correct that before moving up in pot size. This cactus fits that description for sure, so I made sure to remove these circling roots. The reason this is important is that if you leave the plant as is, those circling roots will prevent the root ball from growing out into the fresh soil in an optimal way. Those roots that are circling will not be able to untangle themselves to form a better root architecture. So I will slice them or remove the circling part to stimulate branching of these roots, forming a new architecture, this time maximizing the use of the new soil space that we're providing. And yes, that is the technical term, root architecture. Pretty silly. If it's not root bound, I won't do anything too crazy here because root disturbance can set your plant back from growing if done when unnecessary. Truly, having a good root architecture is most important for trees and large shrubs that will form a large woody root system over a long lifespan. This is because as these roots become woody, thickening like branches do, Any kinks or twists can basically choke the plant to death, which is called girdling, technically. For herbaceous plants and things that will live their entire life in pots, the root architecture is not so vital. In any case, a lot of plants will survive even major root disturbance, so don't be too afraid of making a mistake here. Number 4, planting depth. Now that I have roughed up the root ball, it is time to plant. This is where a common mistake occurs, and I would say this is definitely the most deadly mistake you can make for some plants. This is planting too low. Planting too high is a bit problematic because it can stress roots, but planting too low can be deadly for your plant. Okay, so we know what roots are, and we know what shoots or stems are. The important thing here is to make absolutely sure that the stem is not below the top of the soil. This junction between the stem and roots is called the crown. We want the crown to be just at the soil surface. The reason planting the crown too low can be deadly is that the tissue of the stem of most plants is not adapted to exist under soil, like roots do. Stem tissue needs access to air and tends to rot when sitting in the amount of moisture that is present in the soil. One caveat with this is that some plants really don't mind, such as tomatoes or some aroids. But for cacti, this is definitely a good tip on the whole. Also, if your plant was planted with stem tissue below the soil previously, you might get away with planting at the same depth. Check information on your specific plant, but in most cases, you can't go wrong if you plant at the crown as a rule of thumb. Step number 5, watering in. Okay, now my cactus is planted, and I also added a little top dressing, very optional, maybe controversial even. Seems like our process is complete, does it not? There remains one vital step to finish this transplanting process. This is to water our plant in deeply. Now this is less vital for a cactus or succulent, but I'm in the camp of watering in well after transplanting, even for desert plants. I will be honest here in that this advice differs from the advice given to hobbyists in cactus books, as well as resources such as the American Horticultural Society's Encyclopedia of Gardening. But what is referenced in those books is not what is done at any of the many institutions where I have grown desert plants. Let me explain why I think the resources get it wrong here. For one, the advice for every other type of plant is to water immediately after transplanting. The reason for this is fairly obvious. Roots are the structures that uptake water for the plant, water that is vital to the plant's survival. This uptake job is nearly constant, but roots may be damaged by transplanting. Because the soil environment is heterogeneous, roots have adapted to be very responsive to environmental conditions, including moisture. Ensuring the soil is moist will help prevent root desiccation and encourage new root development by signaling that there is water available to be taken up. This is likely also generally true for succulent plants, so why would they receive different treatment? The argument is that succulents are much more likely to rot if they have open wounds and then sit in moisture, which is a valid concern. But leaving all roots to dry completely doesn't sound great either. I think most importantly, desert plants do not want to stay wet, whether you water right away or later on. Considering how quickly the pot will dry out based on current weather, could tell you which option is right for your circumstance. So, I usually water right after transplanting, but after this first watering, I allow the plant to nearly dry out. Like we mentioned before, the plant's roots are still recovering and have not filled the pot yet. This means they're not going to be uptaking much water just yet, and the pot will need less water on the whole for a while. Keep an eye on the water level to ensure you are not overwatering by allowing the media to dry out between waterings. Make sure when you do water that you give your plant a deep soak, allowing water to run out the drainage hole. Thanks for watching this video. I hope it was helpful and allows your plants to thrive and bring you joy. One thing I will say before we go is that horticulture is an art and a science. By this I mean there are often multiple correct ways to go about a task, which is the art part. The science is that you can measure whether a specific way of doing something actually results in better success. While the field of horticulture is as old as human civilization, There's still a lack of accessible science on many topics. While I tried my best to find trustworthy sources for the information presented here, which I will cite in the description, I still found some of my questions unanswered. So this is all to say that this information provided is based on my understanding of the biology plus my practical experience on the subject. You might find that something different works for you. I am so happy my little cactus has gotten this transplant, as it was long overdue. Thanks for tuning in today. If you like videos on horticultural topics like this and want to see more, consider subscribing to my channel. Thank you so much, and I hope to see you next time. Cheers and happy growing!